The police officer was already standing in my kitchen when I came down the stairs. My daughter-in-law was beside him with her arms folded, and she had my late wife's jewelry box open on the counter between them like an exhibit at trial. Teresa stood by the back door, holding her purse against her chest with both hands. She was crying without making a single sound. Priscilla did not even look at me. "She has been stealing from a dying woman for 8 months, she said, her voice level and clean, like a woman reading off a grocery list. Helen's pearls, gone, and he never noticed a thing. Then she leaned toward the officer and lowered her voice, the way people do when they want you to hear them anyway. "He has dementia," she said. "He does not know what he owns. That is exactly why she picked this house." I was 71 years old. I had testified in 140 criminal trials. I had spent 34 years proving, under oath, that a piece of paper was lying, and I stood there in my own kitchen and let her call me a confused old man, because I had just noticed something about that jewelry box, and I needed her to keep talking. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, and if you believe a quiet man should never be mistaken for a harmless one, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe. To understand what I saw in that jewelry box and what it cost every person standing in my kitchen that morning, you have to go all the way back to the 8th of January and a phone call I got at 4 in the afternoon. My name is Samuel Whitfield. I am 71 years old, and I live at 1428 Ashgrove Lane in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, in a brick colonial that backs onto Marin Creek. Helen and I bought that house in 1979 for $58,000. We paid it off in 2004. She planted the dogwood in the front yard the same spring our son learned to ride a bicycle without falling into it. For 34 years, I was a forensic document examiner for the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. People hear that, and they picture something glamorous. It is not. It is a windowless room, a stereo microscope, an oblique light source, and a stack of paper that somebody is lying about. I examined ransom notes and altered wills. I examined insurance claims and suicide letters that were not suicide letters. I examined signatures on deeds, on checks, on confessions, on medical charts. And I learned one thing that I have never been able to unlearn. A forged signature always has a tremor in it. Not always a visible one. Sometimes it is a blunt start, where the pen came down without momentum. Sometimes it is a hesitation mark, a tiny stall in the middle of a curve, where the hand stopped to look at the model it was copying. An honest signature is written. A forged signature is drawn. The difference is not in the shape. The difference is in the confidence. I testified in 140 criminal trials. I was cross-examined by some of the meanest attorneys in 3 states, and I was never once impeached. I retired 6 years ago. The Bureau gave me a plaque and a sheet cake, and a young analyst named Devon shook my hand and said he had used my 1997 paper on guided hand signatures to pass his certification exam. Then I went home and put my microscope in the basement, and I did not touch it again for 6 years. Helen was a speech-language pathologist. 34 years, Cedar Hollow Public Schools, the same building for the last 20 of them. She taught children who stuttered. She taught children who had suffered strokes before they were old enough for kindergarten. She taught a boy named Ellis Rourke to say his own last name at the age of 9. And Ellis Rourke sent her a card every single Christmas until the year she died. Helen used to say that the cruelest thing in the world is not being unable to speak. The cruelest thing is having something to say and no way to say it. We were married on the 6th of August, 1977, in the basement of St. Bartholomew's, because it rained. 47 years. She had a laugh that started as an absolutely silent shake and then arrived about a second and a half late, like thunder after lightning. On our 30th anniversary, she gave me a small brass lion paperweight. It sits on my desk to this day. On the underside, she had it engraved, "For the quietest man in the room, H. 2007. I asked her what it meant. She smiled at me over her reading glasses. "It means everyone underestimates you," she said, her voice warm and entirely certain, "and that you have never once corrected them." That was Helen. She saw people. It was her whole profession, and it was also just who she was. On the 8th of January, at 4 in the afternoon, our son Marcus called me from her school. Helen had collapsed in the hallway outside the speech room. She was 40 minutes into a session with a 4th grader. It was a left middle cerebral artery stroke. Massive. I got to Cedar Hollow Regional at 4:50. They would not let me in for 2 hours. When they finally did, she was awake. Her eyes tracked me across the room. She knew me completely. Immediately. Absolutely. And she could not say my name. The neurologist called it global expressive aphasia. Her comprehension was largely intact. Her language production was destroyed. She understood every word anyone said to her, for the rest of her life, and she could not produce a reliable sentence in return. The stroke also took her right side, right arm, right hand, right leg. The hemiparesis never really improved. Her right hand lay in her lap, like something she was holding for a stranger. That is what happened to my wife. A woman who spent 34 years giving other people their voices back was locked inside her own head for the last 85 days of her life. I want you to hold on to that. It matters later. It matters more than anything else in this story. She came home on the 22nd of January. That is the day Teresa Vega walked into my house. Teresa was 34 years old, a home health aide with Caldwell Home Care, and a single mother with a 9-year-old daughter named Camila. She was 2 semesters away from finishing her nursing degree at Marin Community College, taking night classes after 12-hour shifts. The first thing Teresa did in my house was not medical. She sat down on the ottoman in front of Helen's chair, and she took Helen's ruined right hand, and she held it. And she looked directly at my wife, and she said something I have thought about nearly every day since. "Mrs. Whitfield, I know you are in there," she said, her voice calm and completely without pity. "I am not going to talk over you. I am going to talk to you," Helen cried, silently, the way she did everything now. And I stood in the doorway of my own front room, 70 years old, and I understood that this young woman had just done for my wife in 11 seconds what I had failed to do in 2 weeks. I had been talking about Helen in front of Helen. Everyone had. Teresa never did. Not once. Not in 8 months. She learned to read Helen's face like a second language. She figured out that 2 blinks meant yes. She figured out that Helen's left hand, the good one, would tap the arm of the chair when she wanted something, and squeeze when she wanted you to stop. She got Helen a whiteboard. Helen's handwriting with her left hand was slow and childlike. Big, shaky block capitals, 6 inches of pure effort per word. But she could get out 3 or 4 words at a time, and she did. Teresa taped every one of those whiteboard messages into a notebook before she wiped it clean. Photographs of them. Dated. She said Helen might want them later. Helen never got a later. On the 15th of March, she had a second stroke. Smaller, but she was already so damaged that there was nothing left to lose except time. Hospice came on the 18th. Morphine started on the 24th. Helen Whitfield died in the hospital bed we put in the front room, under the window she liked, at 6:12 in the morning, on the 3rd of April. Teresa was there. She had been there for 19 hours straight. Our son Marcus arrived at 9:40 that morning. He had been in Cincinnati. I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because it is the truth, and because in this story, the truth is the only weapon I ever had. Now let me tell you about my daughter-in-law. Priscilla Vance Whitfield was 38. She married Marcus in 2013. She was beautiful, in a very deliberate way, the way a magazine cover is beautiful, and she had a smile she could turn on and off like a lamp. She was a senior escrow officer at Meridian Title and Trust, on 4th Street in Cedar Hollow. She was also a commissioned notary public for the state of Ohio. Remember that, a notary. It is going to matter more than anything else on her business card. I never liked her. Helen never liked her either, and Helen liked everyone. Helen said something to me once, in 2016, standing at the sink after a Thanksgiving that had gone badly. "That woman does not look at people," she said, her voice quiet and unusually flat. "She appraises them." Priscilla did not come to the house much while Helen was dying, twice in January, once in February, not at all in March. Then Helen died, and my daughter-in-law developed an enormous and sudden concern for my welfare. She started coming 3 times a week. She brought casseroles I did not eat. She reorganized my medicine cabinet without asking. She told me I looked tired, every single time, until I started to believe it. In May, she brought me a folder from a place called Marrow Ridge Memory Care and set it on my kitchen table, like a brochure for a cruise. "It is just to have," she said, her voice bright and utterly reasonable. "You are alone in this big house, Sam. Nobody is saying anything is wrong, but it is smart to be prepared." In June, she installed cameras, 4 of them. A doorbell camera at the front, one in the kitchen, one in the front room, one over the back door. She said it was for my safety. She said if I fell, she would know. She said Marcus would sleep better. She set the whole thing up on her phone, and she showed me the app for about 40 seconds, and then she watched me fumble with it, and I watched her decide something about me. "You know what, Dad? Do not even worry about it," she said, her voice sweet and utterly patient. "I will just keep an eye on things from my end." She never gave me the password. She did not need to. It was written on the inside cover of the router manual, in the junk drawer, in her own handwriting, because she had needed it herself, and she assumed I would never look. Contempt makes people careless. Write that down. It is the whole reason I am here. On the 11th of June, I fell on the back steps. I caught the edge of the second step with my heel, and I went down hard on my right hand. Scaphoid fracture. Cast from my knuckles to my elbow. Priscilla drove me to the emergency room. She filled out my intake forms. She was, I will admit, genuinely useful that day. I wore that cast for 6 weeks. I could not hold a pen in my right hand from the 11th of June until the 23rd of July. Not a pen, not a fork, not a toothbrush. Everything I signed for 6 weeks, I signed with my left hand, and it looked like a child's work. Hold on to that too. Now, the 14th of September. Teresa still came 3 days a week. After Helen died, I had asked her to stay on. She cooked. She drove me to the cardiologist for my atrial fibrillation. She made sure I actually took the warfarin instead of just moving the bottle around. Mostly she kept the house from being silent. That Saturday, Priscilla came by at 11 in the morning with a bag of groceries I had not asked for. Teresa was at the sink. Priscilla walked into the kitchen, and I watched Teresa go very still. "I know you," Teresa said, her voice pleasant and slightly puzzled. "You came to Mr. Benning's house, Arthur Benning's, over on Delwood. You brought papers for him to sign. I was reading the newspaper. I did not look up, but I have spent my entire life listening to the exact half-second before somebody lies, and the kitchen went completely quiet for 1 full second." "I do not think so," Priscilla said, her voice light and pleasant and 1 degree too fast. "I do a lot of closings. All those houses look the same." "No, it was you," Teresa said, gently, in the tone of someone doing a kindness. "It was August. He was in his robe. There was another man with you, an older man, gray suit. Mr. Bennings could not read the papers, so you read them to him." Priscilla laughed. It was a good laugh. It was warm, and it was self-deprecating, and it was entirely manufactured. "Well, that is my job," she said, her voice easy and amused, reading boring papers to sweet old men, and she put the groceries away, and she talked about the weather, and 11 minutes later she left. I want to be honest with you. I did not understand what I had just heard. Not then. Not for another 6 weeks. What I understood was much smaller and much simpler. I understood that my daughter-in-law had been afraid for exactly 1 second. 11 days later, the police were in my kitchen. The 25th of September was a Thursday. I was upstairs shaving when I heard the front door open without a knock. Then I heard a second voice in my kitchen. A man's voice. Flat, official, patient. I came down the stairs in a cardigan with shaving cream still on my jaw, and I walked into the scene I described to you at the beginning. Officer Ryan Dunn, Cedar Hollow Police Department, maybe 30 years old. Not a bad man, just a young man in somebody else's kitchen, trying to get a story straight so he could leave. Helen's jewelry box was open on the counter. It is a walnut box with a hinged lid, 3 drawers, and a lift-out velvet tray. Her mother gave it to her in 1971. Teresa was by the back door, purse against her chest, silent tears, and Priscilla was standing between them, arms folded, doing the thing she does. She has been stealing from a dying woman for 8 months, she said, her voice level and clean, like a woman reading off a grocery list. Helen's pearls, gone, and he never noticed a thing. She turned slightly toward Officer Dunn and lowered her voice into that stage whisper. He has dementia, she said. He does not know what he owns. That is exactly why she picked this house. Now I want to walk you through the next 4 seconds of my life, the way I would have walked a jury through them. I looked at the jewelry box. The lift-out velvet tray had been removed and set back in crooked. Priscilla's hand had done that, not Teresa's. Teresa had put that tray back 100 times over 8 months and had never once left it crooked. But that was not what stopped me. What stopped me was the pearls. Helen's pearls. A single strand, 17 inches, a small gold fishhook clasp, her mother's before her. Helen sold those pearls in October of 2009. We sold them at Kessler's Jewelry on 4th Street for $2,100, and we put the money toward the caterer for Marcus and Priscilla's engagement party, because Marcus had promised his fiancée a real party, and Marcus did not have the money. Helen made that decision alone. She did not tell Marcus. She absolutely did not tell Priscilla. She told me, in the car, in the parking lot, and she said, "Do not you dare make a face." Those pearls had not been in this house for 16 years. They had not been in this house for 4 years, before Priscilla ever set foot in it. So I stood in my kitchen with shaving cream on my face, and I did the arithmetic that a lifetime of examining documents teaches you to do without being asked. Priscilla was accusing Teresa of stealing an object that Priscilla had never seen. She had never seen it, because it left this house in 2009, which meant she did not learn about the pearls from the box. She learned about them from a photograph. There is one on the mantel. Helen, 1988, at her sister's wedding. Blue dress, 17 inches of pearls. My daughter-in-law had built a criminal accusation out of a picture frame. You do not do that in a moment of anger. You do that at a kitchen table, with a legal pad, at least a week in advance. That is the thing I noticed. That is what made me keep my mouth shut. Because here is the part that people who have not lived inside the justice system do not understand. If I opened my mouth right then, if I said, "Officer, those pearls were sold in 2009, and I have the receipt in the basement," what happens? Priscilla says she is confused. She says she must have been thinking of a different necklace. She says, "Look, he is upset. This is exactly the kind of agitation we have been worried about." And then she goes home, and she never makes that mistake again. She adjusts, she refines, she comes back better. But if I said nothing, then a false statement made to a police officer. In my kitchen, in front of a witness stands. Then it is in a report, with a date, with a case number, in her name. Filing a false police report is a crime in the state of Ohio. So is the theft of a pearl necklace that does not exist. Somebody was going to be charged in this kitchen. I just needed to make sure it was the right person, and I needed about 90 more days to do it. Officer Dunn looked at me. "Sir," he said, his voice careful and slightly too loud, the way people talk to the old. "Is it true you are missing a pearl necklace?" And I let my mouth go slack. I let my eyes drift to the window. "Helen wore pearls," I said, my voice thin and vague and completely, deliberately useless. "She had them at Carol's wedding." I heard Priscilla exhale. It was a small sound. It was satisfaction. I have heard it before, in interview rooms, from the other side of the glass. It is the sound a person makes when the lie takes. Officer Dunn wrote something down. Then he looked at Teresa, and I watched a decent young man do a lazy thing, because the lazy thing was easier. "Ma'am, do you have any objection to me looking in your vehicle?" Teresa did not. Of course she did not. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But it did not matter. It never mattered. Nobody in the history of the world has ever been unaccused. Officer Dunn took a statement. He gave Teresa a case number. He told her she was not under arrest and that the report would go to the prosecutor's office for review. And then he left, and Priscilla walked him to his car, and I saw her lay her hand on his forearm at the curb. Teresa stood in my kitchen and shook. I will tell you exactly what I said to her, because I have never been prouder of any 20 seconds of my life, and because it was the first move of the entire war. I walked over to her. I did not touch her. I stood close enough that she had to look up. "Teresa," I said, my voice quiet and completely steady. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not ask me why." She nodded. "You did not take anything. I know that. I know it better than anyone else on this earth knows anything."
"Mr. Whitfield, I swear to God, I never—"
"Stop." I held up my hand. "Do not swear. Do not defend yourself. Do not call her. Do not text her. Do not post one word about this anywhere, to anyone, ever." She stared at me. "Go home. Say nothing. Tell your lawyer nothing, except the truth, and tell nobody else anything at all." "I do not have a lawyer," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "You do now," I said. "His name is Frank Delgado. He will call you tonight." And then I said the thing that I needed her to carry with her for the next 4 months. "Teresa, look at me. In this house, on this day, you are the only person who is telling the truth. That is going to feel like the weakest position in the room." I picked up my reading glasses off the counter and put them on, and I looked at her over the top of them, the way Helen used to look at me. "It is not. It is the only position that cannot be taken away from you. Now go home to your daughter." She left. I stood alone in my kitchen for a long time. Then I walked into the front room and I sat down in the chair where my wife had died, and I looked at the 4 small white cameras my daughter-in-law had installed in my house, and I understood, all at once, with a clarity I had not felt in 6 years, exactly what I was looking at. She had put a recording device in every room where she conducted her business. The damage came fast, and it came in the way I knew it would. On Monday the 29th, Caldwell Home Care suspended Teresa without pay pending investigation. On Wednesday, the 1st of October, they terminated her. Not for theft, they were careful. They terminated her for a client relations incident, and they flagged her employment file, which in that industry is the same thing as burning her clothes. On the 7th of October, Marin Community College suspended her clinical placement. You cannot do rounds at a nursing home with an open larceny allegation attached to your name. 2 semesters from her RN. 19 years old when she had Camila, 34 now, working nights and weekends and never once complaining. Gone. The Marin County Prosecutor's Office declined to file charges on the 14th of October, for the simple reason that there was no evidence a pearl necklace had ever existed, let alone been stolen. That took 19 days. 19 days is nothing to a prosecutor's office. 19 days is a career to Teresa Vega. And here is the thing I want you to understand about my daughter-in-law. She knew the charges would not stick. She was never trying to convict Teresa. She was trying to make Teresa unbelievable. You do not need a conviction to destroy a witness. You just need a file with an ugly word in it. That is the part I did not understand yet. I still thought Teresa had been fired because Priscilla wanted her out of the house. I did not yet understand that Teresa had been fired because Teresa had recognized her. I called Frank Delgado that Thursday night. Frank and I go back to 1989. He was a public defender for 11 years, and then he got tired of losing, and he moved into civil work and got very good at it, and very rich, and slightly bored. He is 66 now. He has a bad knee, and an excellent memory, and absolutely no patience for anybody who wastes his time. "Sam," he said, "it is 9:40 at night." "Frank," I said, "how would you like to sue a title company?" There was a pause. "Keep talking," he said, his voice suddenly very awake and completely interested. I told him everything I had, which, at that point, was almost nothing. I had a jewelry box with a crooked tray. I had a necklace that did not exist. I had a young woman with a ruined career. I had 4 cameras in my house that I did not control. I had a memory care brochure on my kitchen table, and I had a daughter-in-law who had been afraid for exactly 1 second on the 14th of September. Frank listened without interrupting, which is not like him. When I finished, he said one sentence. "Sam, what is the name of the title company she works for?" "Meridian Title and Trust." Another pause. Longer. "Say that again." "Meridian Title and Trust. On 4th Street. Why?" "Because I have heard that name twice in the last 2 years," Frank said slowly, and both times it was in the same sentence as the words probate dispute. I felt something turn over in my chest, and it was not the atrial fibrillation. "Frank, what do I do?" "Nothing," he said, and his voice went hard and flat and utterly certain. "You do absolutely nothing, Sam. You do not confront her. You do not change your locks. You do not change one single thing about your life. Frank, listen to me. You are 71 years old, and everybody in that family has decided you are a soft old man in a cardigan. Do you have any idea what that is worth?" I looked at the brass lion on my desk, for the quietest man in the room. "It is worth everything," I said. "It is worth everything," Frank agreed. "So be exactly what she thinks you are. Be it harder. Be it every single day. And write down every single thing that happens in this house, with the time, in pencil, in a spiral notebook, and hide the notebook somewhere she will never look." "Where would she never look?" Frank laughed, one short bark. "In your professional papers," he said. "That woman has never once been curious about who you actually are." So that is what I did. For the next 6 weeks, I became the most confused man in the state of Ohio. Let me tell you how you do it. Because it is not what you think. You do not act crazy. Crazy is loud, and loud gets you a psychiatric hold, and a psychiatric hold gets you locked up on somebody else's paperwork. What you do is much smaller and vastly more effective. You become inconvenient. You lose things, small things, reading glasses, mostly, the remote control, a single shoe. You leave the burner on, never long, never dangerously, just long enough that somebody smells it and turns it off and sighs. You call your son by his cousin's name once, and then you catch it, and you look embarrassed, and you say, Marcus. I meant Marcus. That correction is the whole trick. A truly demented man does not catch it. A performing man catches it. Because being caught is what sells it. You repeat a story you already told. Not a long one. A short one. About a dog you had in 1968. You ask what day it is. That was the one that worked hardest. I asked what day it was probably 9 times in 6 weeks. And every single time I already knew. And every single time I watched my daughter-in-law's face do the same tiny, satisfied thing. And then, when they were absolutely certain that I could no longer follow a conversation, they started having their conversations in front of me. That is the whole point. That is the entire game. A camera cannot record a room that nobody is talking in. The cameras came first. On the 2nd of October, at 11 at night, I opened the junk drawer in my kitchen and took out the router manual. On the inside of the front cover, in Priscilla's handwriting, in blue ballpoint, was the network name, the network password, and below it, underlined twice, the login and password for the camera account. She had written it there in June because she needed it during the installation and because she never once imagined that the man who lived in this house would open a drawer and read. I copied it onto an index card. I put the index card inside a 1994 case file in my basement, in a banker's box labeled State v. Halloran, Volume 3. Frank was right. She never went down there. Not once in 12 years. The next morning I drove to the Cedar Hollow Public Library. I did not use my own computer, because my own computer was in a house full of her cameras and connected to a router she had configured. I sat down at public terminal number 4, next to a teenager doing homework, and I logged into the camera account with my daughter-in-law's password, and there it was. 30 days of cloud storage. Every clip, every motion event, every room. The system was recording my life, and it had been recording it since the 19th of June, and every single second of it was legally mine. That is not a technicality. Frank checked it 3 separate ways. Ohio is a one-party consent state. The cameras were installed in my home, in the common rooms of my home, by a person who had my permission to install them, and I am a party to every conversation that takes place in my own front room. There is no expectation of privacy in another man's kitchen. Priscilla Vance Whitfield built the case against herself with her own credit card and her own 2 hands, and she did it because she wanted to watch me fall down. I did not download anything that first day. I just looked, and what I saw made me sit very still for a long time in a public library. Because scattered through the archive, in the kitchen and the front room, on days when I was upstairs napping or out at the cardiologist, were meetings. My daughter-in-law, in my house, with a man in a gray suit, 14 of them, between the 22nd of June and the 29th of September. 14 meetings, in my home, that I had never been told about. I did not know who he was yet. I recognized him the way you recognize a face from a courthouse hallway, and I could not place him, and it bothered me for 4 days. Then I remembered. Wesley Pike, estate attorney. Pike and Danforth, 7th floor of the Marin County Bank building. I had crossed paths with Wesley Pike exactly once, in 2011, when I was retained to examine a disputed handwritten will in a probate case. I found the will authentic. Pike was on the losing side of that fight, and he had shaken my hand afterward with a smile that never made it to his eyes. He was 56 now. Gray suit, gray hair, a gold pen he clicked when he was thinking. And I was the only Whitfield left alive who could tell you what a forged document actually looks like. Now I want to tell you about the notebook, because the notebook is the reason I am not sitting in Marrow Ridge Memory Care right now. Frank told me to write everything down in pencil, in a spiral notebook, with times. I did better than that. I did it the way I did it for 34 years at the bureau, because that is the only way I know how to do anything. Bound notebook, numbered pages, never a page torn out, every entry dated, with the time, in 24-hour notation, every entry initialed, every correction struck through with a single line, initialed and dated, never erased and never obliterated. That is called a contemporaneous log, and it is the difference between a story and evidence. By the end of October, that notebook had 91 entries. Entry 44, 12 OCT, 1420, P. Arrived unannounced. Removed a manila folder from the drawer of the secretary desk in the front room. Did not ask. Did not mention it. Folder contained the deed of trust from the 2011 refinance. SW. I noted that at the time, and I did not understand it. I understood it perfectly. 6 weeks later. She had come into my house and taken a document with my dead wife's signature on it. Now, the performance. There are 3 things I did in October, and I want to be honest about all 3, including the one that still bothers me. The first was the medication. I take warfarin for atrial fibrillation. I have taken it for 9 years. I know the dose, I know the schedule, and I know exactly what happens when the numbers drift. I did not stop taking it. I want to be extremely clear about that. I am not a fool, and I was not willing to die to win. What I did was let her catch me being confused about it. I left the pill organizer open on the counter, with Thursday and Friday both full at 9 at night. I asked her, once, in an uncertain voice, whether I had already taken it. She took a photograph of the pill organizer. I watched her do it, in the reflection of the microwave door, and I turned away and let her. That photograph turned up 11 months later, in a federal courtroom, and it did not do for her what she thought it would do. The second thing was Marrow Ridge. On the 18th of October, Priscilla drove me out there for a tour. She said it was just to look. She said there was no pressure. She said the same 9 sentences she had been saying since May. Marrow Ridge Memory Care is a very clean building, with very soft carpet and a lock on the inside of the front door. I walked through it in my cardigan, and I let my mouth hang slightly open, and I asked the director a question I had already asked her 4 minutes earlier. And at the end of the tour, in the parking lot, my daughter-in-law took a picture of me standing in front of the sign. She smiled at me, and she said, "That was not so bad, was it, Dad?" And I said, "Is Helen coming?" I want you to understand what that cost me. I said my wife's name, in a parking lot, in a way that pretended I did not know she was dead. Helen had been dead for 198 days. I knew the number. I knew it the way you know your own hands. And I used her. I used the greatest grief of my life as a prop, in a parking lot, to make a 38-year-old woman feel safe. Priscilla's face did something then. Not sympathy, not even satisfaction. Relief. She got in the car, and she immediately texted somebody, and her thumbs moved fast and happy. I sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at a maple tree, and I said absolutely nothing for 11 miles. That night I sat in the basement with Helen's photograph, and I apologized to her out loud, like a madman, for 40 minutes. Then I went upstairs and I wrote it in the notebook. Entry 52, 18 OCT, 1605, Marrow Ridge Memory Care, 8800 Grange Pike. Tour arranged by P. I performed disorientation, including a false query regarding H's whereabouts. Recorded here in full, because I will not lie about the methods, not even to myself. Defe. The third thing was the doctor. On the 24th of October, Priscilla took me to a geriatrician named Dr. Renata Landry. Now here is where I have to be careful, because here is where the story turns. Dr. Landry administered a Montreal cognitive assessment, 30 questions. It takes about 15 minutes. Draw a clock, reading 10 past 11. Repeat these 5 words. Name these animals. Count backward from 100 by sevens. I have watched hundreds of hours of neuropsychological testimony in my career. I know precisely what those tests measure, and precisely how they fail. I scored a 22 out of 30. A 22 is mild cognitive impairment. A 22 gets you a follow-up. A 22 does not get you committed, and it does not get you declared incompetent. But it puts a number in a chart that a lawyer can use. I missed the delayed recall on purpose. I gave 3 of 5 words instead of 5. I drew the clock slightly wrong. The hands at 10 past 10 instead of 10 past 11. Small, believable, consistent with grief and age, and a man who had buried his wife in the spring. And Dr. Landry, who is a very good doctor, wrote in her note that my presentation was atypical, that my executive function was intact, and that she wanted to see me again, in 90 days, before drawing any conclusion. She would not give Priscilla the diagnosis she wanted. She would not sign anything. So my daughter-in-law went out and got a signature somewhere else. And that, right there, is the crime. Now let me tell you about Ivy. Ivy Whitfield is my granddaughter. She was 12 years old that autumn. She is Marcus and Priscilla's only child. Ivy is not her mother. I want to say that plainly and early, because you are going to hate this family before we are finished. And Ivy does not belong in that. Ivy has Helen's chin, and Helen's terrible late-arriving laugh, and Helen's absolute inability to lie about anything. She came over on the first Saturday of every month, and she had been doing it since she was 7, and Priscilla let her because it looked good. On the 1st of November, Ivy sat at my kitchen table and ate a grilled cheese sandwich and told me about a science fair project involving mold. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, she said this, "Grandpa, do you have any of Grandma's writing? Like from before?" I put down the newspaper. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged the way 12-year-olds shrug, which is with the whole body. "Because I have the card," she said, "the last one, and I want to know if her writing always looked like that, or if it was just because of the stroke." Everything in my chest stopped. "What card, Ivy?" "My birthday card," she said, completely matter-of-fact. "From Grandma. She gave it to me in March." Ivy's birthday is the 22nd of March. Helen's second stroke was the 15th of March. Helen died on the 3rd of April, which meant that somewhere in my granddaughter's bedroom was a document, in my wife's own hand, dated 7 days after her second stroke, and 5 days before the date on a piece of paper I had not yet found. I kept my voice very, very ordinary. "I would love to see it," I said. "Do you still have it?" "Obviously," she said, offended. "It is in my shoebox." She brought it the following Saturday. A pink card with a cartoon fox on it. Inside, in Helen's left hand, enormous block capitals, each letter drawn separately, wobbling, ragged, angling downhill across the paper. The pressure so heavy in places that the pen had gone through to the back of the card. I want you to understand the physical reality of what I was holding. That card represented probably 45 minutes of labor by a dying woman with a paralyzed right side, holding a pen in a hand that had never held one before. It said, in 3 staggered lines, "Ivy, I love you. I am still in here. Grandma." I sat at my kitchen table with my granddaughter, and I read those 7 words, and I did not cry, because if I had cried, she would have known that something was wrong. I said, "This is beautiful. May I keep it for a little while? I would like to have it framed." She said, "Sure, but I want it back." She got it back. She got it back 14 months later, framed and hanging on a wall in a building with her grandmother's name on it, in front of 200 people. But that comes later. That night I took Ivy's card down to the basement, and I turned on the lamp over my old bench, and I did what I had done 10,000 times before. I took out my stereo microscope. I set the card under oblique lighting at a 15-degree angle. I photographed it at 8 magnifications against a scale, and I looked at my wife's handwriting for the first time in 7 months, and it told me everything. Left-hand execution, unmistakable. The letters were drawn, not written, which is what happens when a person uses their non-dominant hand. The strokes went the wrong direction. The circles closed counterclockwise instead of clockwise. There were blunt starts and blunt stops because there was no momentum, because there was no muscle memory. The baseline sloped down and to the right at about 11 degrees, which is what you get when a person cannot rotate their wrist properly and has to move the whole forearm. The letter spacing was wildly inconsistent because she was placing every letter individually rather than producing a word as a single motor program. And underneath every stroke was tremor. Fine, high frequency, involuntary. Not the tremor of a forger who is copying carefully. The tremor of a nervous system that has been damaged. You cannot fake that, not in either direction. A person with a healthy hand cannot produce it, and a person with a damaged hand cannot escape it. I sat in my basement at 1 in the morning, with a photograph of my wife's last message to her granddaughter on a screen, at 8 magnifications, and I understood that I was now holding the single most important exemplar in the state of Ohio, because I already knew by then that they had a signature. I did not know where it was. I did not know what it said. But I knew, with total, cold, absolute certainty, that somewhere in Wesley Pike's office there was a document with Helen Whitfield's name on it, dated in the last 2 weeks of her life, and I knew that whoever had produced it had made a mistake. They had made it in June, when they forged mine. Because on the 28th of October, in the Marin County Recorder's online index, sitting there in public view for anybody in the world with a library card, I found it. A durable power of attorney. Grantor, Samuel Robert Whitfield. Attorney in fact, Priscilla Vance Whitfield. Notarized by Priscilla Vance Whitfield, Notary Public, State of Ohio. Executed on the 18th of June. And I sat in the Cedar Hollow Public Library, at Public Terminal Number 4, and I looked at my own signature. A confident, forward-slanting, right-handed signature. Fluid, fast, continuous. Written with the whole arm, the way I have signed my name for 60 years. And on the 18th of June, my right arm was in a fiberglass cast, from my knuckles to my elbow. I want to tell you what it feels like to look at a forgery of your own name. It is not rage. Rage came later, and rage is useless anyway. It is a very specific kind of vertigo. It is the feeling of looking at a photograph of yourself doing something you did not do. Because that is what a signature is. It is not a design. It is not a logo. A signature is a record of a hand, at a moment, in time. It is a fossil of a gesture. And somebody had manufactured a fossil of me, on a day when the hand in question was encased in fiberglass and hanging in a sling. I printed that document at the library for 10 cents a page. Then I walked out to my car, and I sat in the parking lot of the Cedar Hollow Public Library, with the engine off, and my heart went into atrial fibrillation for about 90 seconds, and I breathed the way the cardiologist taught me, until it settled. And then I laughed. I laughed out loud in an empty car, and I want to tell you exactly why. Not because it was funny, because it was over. Because in 140 criminal trials, I have never had a case this clean. I did not need to prove that the signature was forged by comparing loops and slants and pen pressure. Although I would do all of that, and I would do it properly, and it would take me 160 hours. I did not even need to. Because the signature was right-handed, and my right hand was in a cast. There was an X-ray. There was an emergency room record. There was an orthopedic follow-up on the 3rd of July. There was a discharge instruction sheet. There were 40 photographs from Ivy's birthday party on the 21st of June, taken by her own mother, on her own phone, and in 11 of them, you can see a fiberglass cast on my right arm. Priscilla Vance Whitfield had personally driven me to the emergency room on the 11th of June. She had filled out my intake paperwork with her own hand. And then, 7 days later, she had produced a document bearing a fluid, right-handed signature from a man whose right hand she had personally watched a physician immobilize. That is not a crime of intelligence. That is a crime of contempt. She did not check, because she did not think of me as a person who could be checked against. I was furniture. I was a problem to be processed. I was a set of assets with a pulse attached. And the exact same thing had been done to my wife. Here is what I did over the next 19 days. And I did all of it in the basement, at night, with the door locked. I built the exemplar file. An exemplar is a known, authentic sample of a person's writing. In a document examination, exemplars are everything. The questioned document is worthless without them. You want them close in time to the questioned document. You want them written in the same circumstances. You want as many as you can possibly get. For Helen, I collected 61, checks going back to 1981, her signature on our 2004 mortgage satisfaction, every card she ever gave me, and she gave me a card for everything. And I had kept every single one of them in a box in the closet, and I had not opened that box since April. I opened it on the 4th of November, and I sat on the closet floor for 2 hours. 47 Christmas cards, 47 anniversaries, birthday cards, get well cards, a card she gave me in 1994 after I lost a case and came home destroyed, on which she had written 6 words. They were wrong. You were right. Sleep. I photographed all 61, and then I sorted them into 2 piles, and the dividing line was the 8th of January. Before the stroke, 49 exemplars. Right hand. Fluid, forward slanting, connected, fast. Her capital H made in a single continuous motion. The terminal D of Whitfield, closing with a small upward flick, an unconscious habit she had since she was a girl. After the stroke, 12 exemplars, all left hand. All block capitals, all drawn, all sloping, all tremored, all agonizing. The hospital consent form, 17th of January. The DNR order, 24th of January. A birthday card to her brother in Toledo, 9th of February, which he mailed back to me in a padded envelope with a note that said, "I could not throw this away." 8 photographs from Teresa's whiteboard notebook, which Teresa had dated, because Teresa was the only person in this story, besides me, who understood that documentation is a form of love. And Ivy's card, 22nd of March, 12 days before Helen died. Every single thing my wife wrote in the last 85 days of her life was written with her left hand. Every single one. There is no exception. There is no ambiguity. There is no room for a defense attorney to stand in. The last time Helen Whitfield's right hand produced a signature was the 29th of December, on a check to the gas company for $84.16. And it never did it again. Because it could not. Because a clot in her left middle cerebral artery had taken that ability away from her at 4 in the afternoon on the 8th of January, in a school hallway, in front of a 9-year-old boy. I built that file over 19 nights, and I never once let myself think about what I was going to find at the end of it, because I already knew, and because, if I let myself feel it, I was not going to be able to work. Frank called me on the 12th of November. "Sam," he said, and his voice was strange. I pulled the recorder's index on Meridian Title. Every instrument they have recorded in Marin County since 2019. And I need you to sit down, and I need you to not say anything for about 4 minutes. I sat down at the kitchen table. There are 9, Frank said. 9 what? 9 quitclaim deeds. 9 separate properties, all in Marin County, all recorded between March of 2019 and August of this year. He paused. Every grantor is over the age of 76. The refrigerator hummed. Every single one of those deeds was notarized by the same notary, Frank said. Priscilla Vance Whitfield. Frank, I am not finished. Every one of them names the same attorney as the drafter. Wesley Pike. Frank, every one of them transfers title to a limited liability company. There are 3 of them. Rose Hill Holdings, Kestrel Property Group, Ashline Ventures. I could hear him turning a page. All 3 LLCs share a statutory agent and a registered address, Frank said. 622 4th Street, Suite 400, which is the 4th floor of the Meridian Title and Trust Building. I closed my eyes. And Sam. Frank's voice dropped. Of the 9 grantors, 7 are dead. I did not say anything. They all died within about a year of the transfer. 2 of them are still alive. One is in a memory care facility in Zanesville. He stopped. The other one is a 79-year-old man named Owen Pratt, who lives on Marin Creek Road, about 1.5 miles from your house, and whose deed is not recorded yet, because his closing is scheduled for the 12th of December. The kitchen was completely silent. Frank, I said, read me the names. He read me the names. Dorothy Callum, 81. Harold Ingersoll, 88. Louise Petrie, 84. Vernon Skaggs, 77. Alma Ruiz, 90. Clifford Dunn, 76. Owen Pratt, 79. Marjorie Teal, 83. And the 9th one, Arthur Bennings, Frank said. 83. 219 Delwood Street. Quitclaim. Recorded on the 4th of August, 2022. Property sold 6 weeks later for $268,000. I stood up so fast that the chair went over backward behind me, because I had heard that name before. I had heard it in my own kitchen, on the 14th of September, out of the mouth of Teresa Vega, 11 days before the police came to my house. You came to Mr. Bennings' house, Arthur Bennings, over on Delwood. You brought papers for him to sign. There was another man with you, an older man, gray suit, and Priscilla had laughed. And 11 days later, Teresa Vega was accused of theft, and fired, and flagged, and suspended from nursing school, and left standing in my kitchen shaking. I had spent 6 weeks believing that my daughter-in-law fired my wife's caregiver because she wanted the house to herself. That was not it. That was never it. She fired Teresa Vega because Teresa Vega had put a face to a name. She did not need Teresa gone. She needed Teresa unbelievable, because a witness with a theft allegation in her employment file is not a witness anymore. She is a liability. She is the first thing a defense attorney puts in front of a jury. My daughter-in-law had destroyed a 34-year-old single mother's entire career, on purpose, with a lie built out of a photograph on my mantle, as a preemptive strike against a testimony that had not even happened yet. That is not greed. Greed I could almost understand. Greed is human. That is calculation. I stood in my kitchen with the chair on the floor behind me, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to put the phone down on the counter and put it on speaker. Sam, Frank said. Sam, are you there? I am here, I said. Your voice is wrong. What is happening? Frank, I said, and I heard my own voice come out of me from a long way away, absolutely level. How much time do I have before the 12th of December? 29 days, Frank said. Why? Because on the 12th of December, they are going to take a 79-year-old man's house, I said. And I am not going to be a witness to that. I am going to be waiting inside it. Now, the 13th of November. That was the night they explained everything to each other. In my dining room, 22 feet from where I was standing in the dark. Here is how it happened. And I want to be precise, because this is the moment the entire thing turned. At 6 in the evening, I did what I had done 9 times in 6 weeks. I got tired, visibly, dramatically tired, in the way that people who work in elder care call sundowning. I got vague. I got a little irritable. I said the same sentence twice, and at 6:40, my daughter-in-law walked me upstairs, put me in bed, turned off the light, and closed the door. She actually said, from the doorway, "Get some rest, Dad. Everything is fine." I lay there for 11 minutes. Then I got up, in my socks, and I opened that door about 4 inches, and I sat down on the top step of my own staircase in the dark. I have lived in that house since 1979. I know which of the 14 stairs creak. It is the 4th, the 9th, and the 11th. I did not touch any of them. I sat on the top step, in the dark, with my back against the wall, and I listened to my daughter-in-law and Wesley Pike explain the entire architecture of their crime to each other, at my dining room table. And in the kitchen, 40 feet away, on the counter next to the toaster, a small white camera that Priscilla Vance Whitfield had purchased with her own credit card in June was recording every single word of it in high definition. I have listened to that recording 40 times. I have listened to it in Frank Delgado's conference room, and in a federal building in Columbus, and in a courtroom with 300 people in it. I can recite it from memory. I expect I will be able to recite it from memory on the day I die. They came in at 7:04. I heard the front door. Wesley Pike said something about the weather. Priscilla laughed at it. Then chairs. Then a briefcase. Then the specific, unmistakable sound of a document being slid across a wooden table. "He is asleep?" Wesley asked, his voice low and slightly nervous. A man who did not enjoy being in the house. "He is out cold," Priscilla said, her voice bored and entirely unbothered. "He was asking me what day it was at 5 o'clock. He asked me twice." Wesley laughed. I sat on the top stair in my socks, and I thought, it is Thursday, the 13th of November. It is 7:06 in the evening. My wife has been dead for 224 days. I remember everything. "Do not get comfortable," Wesley said. "We have a problem." "We do not have a problem." "Priscilla, Landry would not sign papers. Landry is a coward," Priscilla said, her voice flat and utterly dismissive. She wanted 90 more days. 90 days. Do you know what happens in 90 days? Nothing happens in 90 days. The Pratt closing happens in 29 days, Wesley, and Grant has already borrowed against it. A chair scraped. "Landry does not matter. I got the certification from Halcom." There was a silence. "Say that again," Wesley said, very quietly. "Dr. Peter Halcom, Grant's guy, same one he used for Skaggs. Ice in a glass. 2-page incapacity certification. Signed, dated the 6th of November. It says, Samuel Whitfield lacks the capacity to manage his financial affairs. Halcom has never met him." "Halcom has never met anybody," Priscilla said, and she laughed, and it was the most relaxed sound I have ever heard a human being make. That is the entire point of Halcom. I sat in the dark, and I felt something go through me that I had not felt in 6 years. It was not fear. It was the specific, quiet, complete focus that used to come over me at the moment a defense attorney asked me the question he should not have asked. "All right," Wesley said. He sounded relieved. "All right, so we file the incapacity certification, the POA activates, and you sign for him. I sign for him. And the trust amendment holds." "Wesley." Her voice went sharp for the first time. "The trust amendment holds, because it is dated the 27th of March, and Helen was alive on the 27th of March. It is notarized. You witnessed it. There is nothing to attack. She was on morphine on the 27th of March. So the aide was in the room." "The aide?" Priscilla said. and I could hear her smile, is a thief who was fired for stealing a dead woman's pearls, and there is a police report with a case number that says so. Nobody is putting her in front of a jury. Nobody would dare. I want you to hear that again. There is a police report with a case number that says so. She said it out loud, in my dining room, on camera. She stated, to a co-conspirator, that she had manufactured a criminal allegation in order to neutralize a witness. I sat on that stair, and I put my hand over my own mouth, because for 1 second, I thought I was going to make a sound. Fine, Wesley said. Fine. Walk me through it once more. Grant is going to ask. And she did. She walked him through the whole thing, from the beginning, in the calm and slightly impatient voice of a woman explaining a filing system to a slow employee. I am going to give it to you, the way she gave it to him. In March, she said. Helen Whitfield was non-verbal and paralyzed on her right side. She could not object, and she could not sign. So I did not need her to sign. I needed a signature. Silence. The house has been in the Whitfield Family Trust since 2019. Sam and Helen are co-trustees. On death of the first, everything goes to the survivor. There is nothing to take. Papers. So we do not take it. We amend the trust. The First Amendment, Wesley said. The First Amendment to the Whitfield Family Trust, executed the 27th of March, signed by Helen Whitfield as co-trustee. Ice, in the glass again. It does 3 things. It installs you as co-trustee. It makes the trust irrevocable upon the incapacity of the surviving settlor. And it names a remainder beneficiary. The charity. The charity. And then my daughter-in-law said the sentence that I have never fully recovered from. The Helen Whitfield Memorial Charitable Trust, she said. It is beautiful, Wesley. It is genuinely beautiful. Nobody in the history of the world has ever challenged a charity named after a dead schoolteacher. I sat on the top step of my own house, in the dark, in my socks, and I felt my entire body go cold from the scalp down. They had not just stolen from my wife. They had taken her name. They had taken the name of a woman who spent 34 years teaching children to speak, and they had bolted it onto a shell, and they had used it as camouflage, because they understood, correctly, that nothing in this world is harder to attack than a dead woman's memory. They were going to run my wife's estate through a fake charity, with my wife's name on the letterhead, and people were going to send it flowers. Where did you get the signature? Wesley asked. The 2011 refinance, Priscilla said. The deed of trust. It is recorded. It is public. I pulled the image, cleaned it up, printed it at scale, and traced it on the light table in the closing room. That is a hell of a risk. It is a hell of a signature, she said, and she laughed. Wesley, I have looked at 40,000 signatures. I know what a good one looks like. That one is perfect. I closed my eyes. She had traced my wife's signature from a public record, which meant that somewhere in the world there existed 2 documents, bearing signatures, that would superimpose upon each other. And I want to tell you something about that, because it is the entire heart of my profession. No human being can sign their name the same way twice. Not you, not me, not anyone. Every signature you have ever produced is a unique event. There is natural variation in every one of them. The slant shifts a degree, the pressure changes, the proportions drift by a millimeter. That variation is the proof of life. It is the fingerprint of a nervous system doing something in real time. And so when you place 2 signatures on top of one another, and they match, when every curve, every loop, every ratio, every pen lift lines up exactly, you have not proved that they were signed by the same person. You have proved the opposite. You have proved that one of them was traced from the other. An exact match is not evidence of authenticity. An exact match is evidence of forgery. It is the first thing they teach you. It is the first thing I ever taught anybody. And my daughter-in-law, a woman who had looked at 40,000 signatures across a closing table, did not know it. Because she had looked at 40,000 signatures, she had never once examined one. And the second one? Wesley asked. The power of attorney. June. Whose? His. A pause. Same method. He signs everything the same way. I pulled his signature off the 2011 deed too. They both signed it. It is the same page. I traced them from the same document, 2 months apart. I put my head back against the wall. She had traced both of us. From the same page. Off a single recorded instrument, sitting in the Marin County Recorder's public index, available to anybody on earth for $2. And that is the moment. That specific moment, at approximately 7:19 on the evening of the 13th of November, when I stopped being a grieving old man and became a forensic document examiner again. Because a traced signature is not a comparison problem. A traced signature is an arithmetic problem, and arithmetic does not care how good your lawyer is. You are sure about the dates, Wesley said, and Priscilla Vance Whitfield said the 7 words that ended her life as she knew it. Nobody looks at the dates, Wesley, she said, her voice easy and warm and absolutely monumentally certain. Nobody has ever looked at the dates. I sat in the dark. I have looked at nothing but dates for 34 years. Chairs moved, briefcase latches, and then Wesley Pike said the last thing on the recording, and it is the line the Assistant United States Attorney chose to play twice. You are not worried about him at all? He was BCI, Priscilla. The man testified in more trials than I have. And my daughter-in-law, standing in my dining room, under my wife's photograph, 22 feet from where I was sitting, said this. Wesley, she said, with real affection in her voice, the way you speak about a pet. He is a house cat now. He is a sweet, sad, harmless old house cat who cannot find his own glasses. They laughed. They laughed together for about 4 seconds, and then they left. I sat on the top step of that staircase for a very long time after the front door closed. I sat there until my legs went numb. And then I got up, and I went downstairs, and I turned on the light in my dining room, and I stood there, looking at the chair she had been sitting in, and I said it out loud, to an empty room, in a completely level voice. No, sweetheart, I said. I am not a house cat. I looked up at the photograph of my wife on the wall. Helen, 1988. Blue dress, pearls. I am the thing that has been sleeping in the sun for 6 years, I said, while everyone walked past and told each other I was tame. I drove to the library at 8:40 the next morning, and I downloaded 51 minutes of video onto 3 separate flash drives. Then I drove to Frank Delgado's office on Ellsworth Avenue, and I put one of them on his desk. Frank watched it with his glasses pushed up on his forehead, and his hands folded on his stomach, and his face absolutely still. When it ended, he did not move for about 10 seconds. Then he took his glasses off, and he set them on the desk, and he rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. Sam, he said, in 37 years, I have never seen anything like that. It is good? It is not good, Frank said, and he looked up at me, and his eyes were bright and hard. It is a confession. Sam, that is a confession to a federal conspiracy, delivered voluntarily, in a private residence, by 2 parties who are both fully identified on camera, recorded lawfully by the owner of the premises. He picked up his phone. Who are you calling? The United States Attorney's Office in Columbus, Frank said. And then Elena Cruz. No, I said. Frank stopped with his thumb over the screen. Not yet, I said. Frank, if you call the FBI today, they open a file. That file takes 6 weeks to get an agent assigned. In 28 days, A 79-year-old man loses his house. Frank put the phone down. And, I said, we do not have the document. What document? The First Amendment to the Whitfield Family Trust, the one dated the 27th of March. I sat down across from him. Frank, I have a recording of a woman describing a forgery. I do not have the forgery. So we subpoena it. With what case? I said. There is no case. Nobody has filed anything. Pike is holding that document in his office, and there is nothing on this earth that compels him to produce it. Frank leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Then you are going to have to make him file it, he said slowly, and I smiled at him. Frank, I said, she already has. Because that was the entire point of Dr. Peter Halcombe. You cannot use a durable power of attorney to seize a man's assets until you establish that the man is incapacitated. And in Ohio, when a trust becomes irrevocable and a successor trustee steps in, the trustee must give notice. She was going to file it. She had to file it. It was the only way the machine turned. And she filed it on the 21st of November, a notice of succession of trustee, lodged with the Marin County Probate Court. Case number 25, attached to it, as Exhibit A, was a 2-page incapacity certification signed by Peter L. Halcombe, M.D. Attached to it, as Exhibit B, was a certified copy of the First Amendment to the Whitfield Family Trust, dated the 27th of March, signed by Helen Marie Whitfield, witnessed by Wesley T. Pike, notarized by Priscilla Vance Whitfield, and attached to it, as Exhibit C, was a durable power of attorney, dated the 18th of June, bearing my signature. She filed my wife's forged signature into a public court record. She had to. That is how theft under color of law works. The whole scheme depends on paper, and paper has to be shown to somebody eventually, and the moment it is shown, it can be examined. Frank walked into the Marin County Probate Court on the 24th of November and paid $4.50 for certified copies. He brought them to my house at 4 in the afternoon, and I took them down to my basement, and I locked the door, and I turned on the lamp over the bench, and I looked at my dead wife's signature for the first time. I am going to tell you what I saw, slowly, the way I would tell a jury. The signature on the First Amendment read Helen Marie Whitfield. It was right-handed, forward slanting, about 22 degrees off vertical, connected, fluent, produced with what appeared to be considerable speed. It sat cleanly on the baseline. The capital H was executed in a single continuous motion. The terminal D closed with a small upward flick. It looked exactly like my wife's signature. It looked exactly like my wife's signature from 1998, and from 2004, and from 2011. And it was, without any question whatsoever, the most obvious forgery I have ever examined in my entire professional life. Here is why. Point 1. On the 27th of March, Helen Whitfield's right arm was paralyzed. She had a dense right hemiparesis from a left middle cerebral artery infarct, sustained on the 8th of January, confirmed on MRI, documented in 140 pages of medical records, and never at any point improved. She could not lift that arm above her lap. She could not close that hand around a pen. There is a physical therapy note from the 3rd of February that assigns her right upper extremity a manual muscle test grade of 1 out of 5. A grade of 1 means a flicker of muscle contraction with no movement. She did not sign that document with her right hand because on the 27th of March, Helen Whitfield did not have a right hand that worked. That is not an opinion. That is anatomy. Point 2. Every authenticated sample of my wife's writing produced after the 8th of January is left-handed block printing. 61 exemplars. 49 before the stroke, 12 after. The 12 after are drawn, sloped, tremored, and printed. They do not connect. They do not slant forward. They do not sit on a baseline. They descend across the page at 11 degrees, because she could not rotate her wrist and had to swing her whole shoulder. The last of those 12 is a pink birthday card with a cartoon fox on the front, dated the 22nd of March. 5 days before the document Priscilla filed. 5 days. You cannot show a jury 2 pieces of paper 5 days apart. One of them a wobbling 6-inch printed I love you, and the other a fluid cursive signature, and ask them to believe both were made by the same hand. You cannot do it. Nobody can do it. Point 3. And this is the one that ends it. I scanned the question's signature from the First Amendment at 1200 dots per inch. Then I scanned Helen's signature from the 2011 Deed of Trust, recorded in the Marin County Recorder's Office, Volume 4471, page 219, available to any human being with $2 and an internet connection. The same document Priscilla had told Wesley Pike she pulled the image from. Then I did the simplest, dumbest, most devastating thing in the entire discipline. I put one on top of the other. They matched. Total length, identical to within 0.004 of an inch. Height of the capital H, identical. Baseline slant, identical. Every loop, every ascender, every descender, every pen lift, every one of the 11 directional changes in the surname, superimposed. At 1200 dots per inch, the 2 signatures disappeared into each other. Now, I have spent 34 years explaining this to juries, and I am going to explain it to you exactly the way I explained it to 12 people in a federal courtroom in Columbus, Ohio. Take a piece of paper right now. Sign your name. Now sign it again, directly underneath. Now look at them. They are not the same. They are similar. They are recognizably yours. But the second one is a hair longer, or the slant is off by a degree, or the loop on the letter L came out fatter. That difference is called natural variation. It exists because a signature is not a picture that you copy. It is a motor program that your brain executes. And your brain, being a living organ, attached to a living arm in a living body, executes it slightly differently every single time. Your hand is warmer, the pen is different, you are annoyed, you are in a hurry, the desk is at a different height. There is no such thing as 2 identical signatures. There has never been one. In the entire recorded history of forensic document examination, no genuine pair of signatures has ever been found to superimpose exactly. Not once. So when you find 2 that do, there is exactly one explanation, and every document examiner on the face of the earth will give you the same one. One was copied from the other. An exact match does not prove that a signature is real. An exact match is the single most damning thing you can find. It is the tracing. And my daughter-in-law had put a traced signature, traced by her own admission, on a light table in the closing room of Meridian Title and Trust, into a certified filing at the Marin County Probate Court. She had handed me a forgery, notarized in her own name, with her own commission number printed under it. I sat in my basement at 11 at night, and I looked at the overlay on the screen for a long, long time. And then, I picked up the phone, and I called Frank Delgado, and I said 8 words. "Frank," I said, "call the FBI in the morning." Special Agent Dana Okafor came to my house on the 2nd of December. She was maybe 40, navy suit. She did not take her coat off for the first 11 minutes, which I understood, because that is what you do when you are not sure yet whether you are going to stay. She had a younger agent with her named Petrakis, who did not say anything and wrote everything down. I made coffee. I put out the file, not a stack of papers, a file, tabbed, indexed, paginated, with a table of contents on the front and a chain of custody log on the back. 11 volumes. Agent Okafor opened volume 1, and she read the first 3 pages standing up, And then she sat down, and then she took her coat off. She did not speak for 40 minutes. At the 41st minute, she looked up at me over the top of the binder, and she said something I will keep for the rest of my life. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, her voice careful and slightly hoarse, "I trained on your 1997 paper, the one on guided hand and traced signatures. It is in the curriculum at Quantico. I did not know what to say to that, so I did not say anything." She looked back down at the binder. "They picked the wrong house," she said. "Now let me tell you about Arthur Bennings. Because if this story were only about me, it would not be worth telling, and I would not be telling it. Arthur Bennings lived at 219 Delwood Street for 51 years. He was a pipe fitter at the Marin Works until it closed in 1998, and then he drove a school bus for 11 years because he liked kids and he could not sit still. He paid off his house in 1989. His wife died in 2016. In the summer of 2022, he had a bad fall and a worse infection, and he came home from the hospital confused and weak, and Caldwell Home Care sent an aide. The aide was Teresa Vega. On the 4th of August, 2022, a woman from a title company came to his house with an older man in a gray suit, and they brought papers, and they read the papers to him because he could not see well enough to read them himself. Arthur Bennings signed a quitclaim deed, transferring his house to Rose Hill Holdings, LLC, for the sum of $1 and other valuable consideration. 6 weeks later, the house sold for $268,000. Arthur Bennings did not receive $1. He did not receive the other valuable consideration either. He was moved into a Medicaid nursing home in Zanesville in November of 2022 because he no longer owned any property and had no assets, and he died there on the 9th of February, 2023. He was 83 years old. I met his daughter on the 6th of December, in a diner on Route 9, with Frank Delgado sitting next to me, and a manila envelope on the table between us. Her name is Ruth Bennings Cole. She is 61. She lives in Akron, and she teaches 3rd grade. I told her who I was. I told her what I had. She listened without moving. And when I finished, she said, in a voice that was almost completely flat, "He told me he sold it. Ma'am, my father." She was looking at the salt shaker. "He called me, and he said he had sold the house, and the money was in an account, and I was not to worry about it. And I said, 'Dad, what account?' And he said he did not remember the name." She looked up. "And I got angry with him," Ruth said. "I got angry with my father on the telephone, and I told him he should have talked to me first, and I told him he was being careless." She put her hand flat on the table. "He apologized to me," she said. "He apologized to me for being careless with a house that was stolen out from underneath him. And then he died in a place that smelled like bleach, and I did not visit him for 6 weeks because I was still angry." Nobody said anything. Then Ruth Bennings Cole looked at me across a diner table on Route 9, with tears running down her face, and absolutely no expression at all. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Everything," I said. "Then you have it. Elena Cruz is the Marin County prosecuting attorney. She is 47 years old, and she has held that office for 9 years. In 1999, she was a 21-year-old law clerk, and then a very green assistant prosecutor, and the first serious case she ever tried was State versus Halloran. Halloran was a poisoning. The entire case turned on a handwritten note. I was her expert. She had me on the stand for 6 hours, and she was so nervous that her hands shook when she handed me the exhibit, and she asked me one question so badly that the judge sustained an objection before the defense even stood up. And then she got better, in real time, in front of me. By hour 4, she was excellent. By hour 6, she was dangerous. She got the conviction, and afterward, in the hallway, she shook my hand and said thank you, and then went into the stairwell and, I am told, threw up. I have not spoken to Elena Cruz in about 11 years. She called me on the 8th of December at 7:15 in the morning. "Sam," she said, and her voice was not a prosecutor's voice yet. "Dana Okafor sent me 11 volumes and a video. Elena, Sam, is your daughter-in-law?" "Yes." There was a very long pause. "Okay," Elena Cruz said, and her voice changed, and it became a completely different instrument. "Then here is what we are going to do." The problem was Owen Pratt. Owen Pratt is 79 years old, a widower, a retired mail carrier, and he lives in a small yellow house at 1207 Marin Creek Road with a beagle named Duchess. He has moderate macular degeneration. He cannot read a document without a magnifier and good light. And on the 12th of December, at 10 in the morning, he was scheduled to sit down at his own kitchen table and sign a quitclaim deed transferring his house to Kestrel Property Group, LLC. Frank wanted an injunction. Get in front of a judge, freeze the transaction, save the man's house. Elena Cruz said no. "If we enjoin the closing," she said, "we tip them. Pike burns his files. Grant Mercer moves the LLCs. Priscilla walks into a lawyer's office and stops talking forever. And everything we have becomes a very interesting story instead of a case. So what do you want to do?" "I want to let it happen," Elena said. "And I want a federal agent under the man's kitchen table." That is more or less what they did. On the 9th of December, Agent Okafor and Elena Cruz sat in Owen Pratt's living room for 3 hours and told him the truth. I was not in the room. I asked to be, and Okafor said absolutely not, and she was right, and I did not argue. Owen Pratt listened to 2 strangers tell him that he was 3 days away from losing the house he had lived in since 1974. And then he asked one question: "Will it help the others?" Okafor told me later that she said yes. She said she almost never says yes to that question, and that she said it anyway, and that she meant it. Owen Pratt said, "Then set it up." On the 12th of December, at 9:52 in the morning, Priscilla Vance Whitfield and Wesley Pike arrived at 1207 Marin Creek Road. Grant Mercer arrived at 10:04. Grant Mercer was 49 years old, the owner and managing member of Meridian Title and Trust, and the sole manager of Rose Hill Holdings LLC, Kestrel Property Group LLC, and Ashline Ventures LLC. He almost never went to the closings himself. He went to this one because he had borrowed $410,000 against a house he did not own yet, and he was nervous, and nervous men supervise. They sat at Owen Pratt's kitchen table for 51 minutes. They were recorded from 4 angles. Priscilla read the deed aloud to Owen Pratt, and she read it wrong. She told him it was a lien release. She told him it would clear a debt from his wife's medical bills. She notarized his signature. Wesley Pike witnessed it, and Grant Mercer stood by the refrigerator with his hands in his pockets and said, "At minute 44, on tape, you are doing the right thing, Mr. Pratt. Your family is going to be very grateful." They walked out to their cars at 10:48 in the morning. Nobody arrested them. That was the hardest part, and I did not understand it, and Elena Cruz explained it to me that night, in a way I have never forgotten. "Sam," she said, "an arrest is a moment. An indictment is a wall. I do not want a moment. Now, I have to tell you about my son. I have been putting it off for 11 pages, and I am going to stop putting it off." On the 15th of December, Agent Okafor called me and asked me to come to the federal building in Columbus. She put me in a small conference room, and she gave me a coffee I did not drink. And then she put a single sheet of paper on the table in front of me. It was an affidavit of attesting witness, dated the 27th of March, executed in connection with the First Amendment to the Whitfield Family Trust. It stated that the affiant was present when Helen Marie Whitfield executed the instrument. that she appeared to be of sound mind, that she executed it freely and voluntarily and without duress. Notarized by Priscilla Vance Whitfield. Signed by Marcus Robert Whitfield. My son. I looked at that piece of paper for a long time. Mr. Whitfield, Agent Okafor said, very quietly. On the 27th of March, your son was at a sales conference at the Marriott downtown in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have his hotel folio, his corporate expense report, his badge scan at the convention center, and a photograph of him at a dinner that his own employer posted on a public account. She put a second sheet down. He was 3 hours away, in another state, and he signed a sworn statement saying he watched his mother sign a document. The room was very quiet. Did he know what he was signing? I said. He says he did not read it. Did he know it was false? Agent Okafor did not look away from me. He knew he was not in the room, sir, she said. And there it is. There is the whole thing. There is everything I could not admit to myself for 4 months. My son did not forge anything. My son did not trace a signature, or bribe a doctor, or run a shell company. My son signed a sworn statement, claiming to have witnessed his mother's last act, on a day when he was in a hotel bar in Indianapolis, because his wife put the paper in front of him, and he did not want to have an argument. He owed $94,000 on credit cards and a boat. He wanted his life to be easy, and so he lied about the last thing his mother ever did. I want to tell you that I broke down. I did not. I want to tell you that I called him. I did not do that either. What I did was sit in a conference room in a federal building in Columbus, Ohio, and think about the 8th of January, when I called him from the emergency room, and he said, "Dad, is she going to be okay?" And his voice cracked, and he was 40 years old and he sounded 11. He loved her. That is the unbearable part. He loved her, and it did not matter, because loving somebody is not a character trait. It is a feeling, and feelings do not stand up when a stronger person tells you to sign something. I said one thing to Agent Okafor before I left. Do not offer him a deal to testify against her, I said. She blinked. Sir, that is not really your... I know it is not my call. I stood up and I put my coat on. I am asking anyway. Do not make him a witness. Why? I stood in the doorway of a federal conference room, 71 years old, and I answered honestly. Because I do not want my son to be a man who saved himself, I said. I want him to be a man who took what he had coming. It is the last thing I can give him. The grand jury sat on the 19th of January. I testified for 4 hours and 20 minutes. I have been in front of grand juries before. This one was different, and I will tell you why. They did not need me to be an expert. They needed me to be an old man with a shoebox. And so I did the thing I had been trained never to do. I did not lead with the science. I led with a pink birthday card, with a cartoon fox on it. I put it up on the screen, and I let 12 strangers read 7 words, written by a dying woman with the wrong hand, and I did not say anything for about 15 seconds. Ivy, I love you. I am still in here, Grandma Ron. Then I put the forged trust amendment up next to it, 5 days apart, and I said, Ladies and gentlemen, that is my wife's hand, and that is not. The indictment came back on the 28th of January. It was sealed. 41 counts. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. 11 counts of wire fraud. 3 counts of aggravated identity theft. Conspiracy against the United States. Plus a companion state indictment out of Elena Cruz's office for forgery, tampering with records, notary fraud, and theft from a person in a protected class. 9 victims named. 4 defendants. Priscilla Vance Whitfield, Wesley T. Pike, Grant A. Mercer, Peter L. Halcomb, M.D., and a separate, single-count state bill of information against Marcus Robert Whitfield for making a false statement in a notarized instrument. Elena Cruz called me on the evening of the 28th. It is done, she said. We take them the first week of February. Elena, I said, may I ask you for something? There was a pause on the line, and I could hear her deciding whether she was talking to a victim or to the man who once taught her how to hold an exhibit. Ask, she said. On the 6th of February, I said, the Marin County Bar Association holds its annual Justice and Service Luncheon at the Ashland Hotel. I am aware. I have to give a speech. Wesley Pike is receiving the Distinguished Service Award, I said, for pro bono legal services to the elderly. The silence on the other end of that line went on for 6 full seconds. And Meridian Title and Trust, I said, is the presenting sponsor. Grant Mercer's name is on the program. Priscilla will be at his table, because she always is, because she runs his marketing. Sam, the Bar Association invited me 2 months ago to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award, I said. I told them no. I have told them no 4 years in a row. I looked at the brass lion on my desk. I am going to call them back tomorrow, I said, and I am going to tell them yes, and I am going to ask for 11 minutes and a projector. Elena Cruz did not say anything for a long time. Sam, she said finally, and her voice was very careful. You understand what you are asking me to do. I am asking you to arrest 4 people in a ballroom instead of a driveway. I am asking whether you understand what you are asking me to do. I did. I understood perfectly. I was asking the prosecuting attorney of Marin County to let a 71-year-old man stand up in front of 300 lawyers, 4 sitting judges, 2 federal agents, and a television camera from Channel 6, and take apart 4 people who did not yet know they had been indicted. Elena, I said, in 1999, you asked me a question about a note in a poisoning case, and you asked it wrong, and Judge Ferris cut you off, and you went red to your collar. I remember, and I sat on that stand, and I waited, and you asked it again, correctly, and you buried that man. I closed my eyes. You did not need me to save you. You needed somebody to give you the room. The line was quiet. Give me the room, Elena. Elena Cruz exhaled. 11 minutes, Sam, she said. Do not make me regret it. The 6th of February was a Friday, and it snowed. The Marin County Bar Association holds its Justice and Service Luncheon in the Grand Ballroom of the Ashland Hotel on Chestnut Street, and it has done so every year since 1961. 306 people were in that room. 4 sitting judges, including the Honorable Diane Reddick of the Marin County Probate Court, who had, 10 weeks earlier, accepted the filing of a forged trust amendment into her own docket, the president of the Marin County Bar Association, the dean of the law school, 240 practicing attorneys, a photographer, and, at a table near the front, a young reporter from Channel 6 named Bethany Kwan, who had been sent to cover a luncheon and was extremely bored about it. I got there at 11:40. I wore the same suit I wore to Helen's funeral, because it is my only good one, and because I wanted to. I brought 2 things with me, a flash drive and a small brass lion paperweight with an engraving on the bottom. Priscilla saw me at 11:52. She was standing near the Meridian title table in a dark green dress, holding a glass of white wine, laughing at something Grant Mercer had said. And her face, when she turned and saw me in the doorway of that ballroom in a black suit, did the most extraordinary thing. It went completely blank for about a quarter of a second, and then it filled up with the warmest, kindest, most concerned expression you have ever seen on a human being. She came across that ballroom floor like a woman crossing to greet her own father. "Dad," she said, and she took both of my hands, and her voice was soft and sweet, and utterly bewildered. "Oh, Dad, what are you doing here? Does Marcus know you are here?" She looked over her shoulder at Grant Mercer and gave him a small, apologetic smile. The kind that says, "I am so sorry." He does this. "Sweetheart, this is a lawyer's thing," she said gently, patting my hand. "Let us get you home. Come on. It is snowing, and you should not be driving." And I looked at my daughter-in-law, and I did the very last performance of my life. I let my eyes go a little soft. I let my mouth open slightly. I looked around the ballroom, like a man who was not sure how he had gotten there. "Is Helen coming?" I said. I watched the relief go through her whole body. I watched her shoulders come down an inch. I watched the corner of her mouth move. And I want to say something to every single person listening to this, because I think it is the most important thing I have to give you. Contempt is a blindfold. The moment someone decides you are less than them, they stop watching you, and you become invisible. Completely, entirely, absolutely invisible. And an invisible man can walk anywhere he wants. "Oh, Dad," Priscilla said, and she squeezed my hands, and her eyes were shining with a sympathy so convincing that I almost believed it myself. "No, honey, Helen is not coming." Then a hand came down on my shoulder. "Sam Whitfield," said the president of the Marin County Bar Association in an enormous, delighted, carrying voice. "4 years I have been asking. 4 years. Come on, we have got you up front." And I watched my daughter-in-law's face change. Not much, just a flicker, a hairline crack across a very expensive piece of glass. "Up front?" she said. "He is getting the Bricker Medal," the president said cheerfully. "Lifetime achievement. 60 seconds of remarks, right after Wesley's award. Come on, Sam." And I let him lead me away, and I did not look back at her, not once. Wesley Pike accepted the Distinguished Service Award at 12:41 in the afternoon. He gave a lovely speech. He talked about his mother. He talked about the vulnerability of the elderly. He talked about how the greatest privilege of his career had been sitting at the kitchen tables of people who had worked their whole lives and simply needed someone to explain the paperwork to them. He got a standing ovation. I stood up too. I clapped. I clapped for 11 seconds. And I looked at that man in his gray suit, holding a crystal plaque, and I thought about Arthur Bennings dying in a room that smelled like bleach. Then they called my name. There is a photograph of me walking to that lectern. It ran on the front page of the Cedar Hollow Dispatch 4 days later. You can see 300 people applauding an old man in a black suit with his reading glasses in his breast pocket. And you can see, in the second row of tables, a woman in a dark green dress who is not applauding. She is watching me, and she has her phone in her hand under the table. She was texting Wesley Pike. We have those texts. They came out at trial. 12:47. Why is he here? 12:47. Wesley. 12:48. He has a flash drive. I reached the lectern. I set the brass lion down on the wood, next to the microphone, facing out. I put my reading glasses on, and I looked out at 306 people. "Thank you," I said. "I am told I have 60 seconds. I am going to need about 11 minutes, and I have already cleared it with your prosecuting attorney, so please do not blame the caterer." There was a laugh. "My name is Samuel Whitfield. For 34 years, I was a forensic document examiner with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Many of you have cross-examined me. Some of you enjoyed it." Another laugh, bigger. "I would like to give a short lecture," I said. "It is the same lecture I have given at Quantico, and at Ohio State, and at this association's own continuing legal education seminar in 2004. It is called The Anatomy of a Forged Signature." I nodded at the young man at the projector. "May I have the first slide?" And Helen's birthday card to Ivy came up on a 12-foot screen in the grand ballroom of the Ashland Hotel. Pink card, cartoon fox, 7 words in enormous, staggering, broken block capitals. "Ivy, I love you. I am still in here. Grandma." The room went quiet, in a way that rooms do not usually go quiet. That was written on the 22nd of March of last year, I said, by my wife, Helen Marie Whitfield, to our granddaughter. Helen was a speech-language pathologist in the Cedar Hollow schools for 34 years. On the 8th of January, she had a stroke. It took her speech, and it took her right side. I let that sit. She wrote that with her left hand. It took her about 45 minutes. She died 12 days later. Nobody in that ballroom moved. Now, I want to teach you how to look at it. And I did. For 4 minutes and 40 seconds, I gave 306 lawyers a clinic. I showed them the blunt starts, where the pen came down without momentum. I showed them the counterclockwise circles, which is what happens when a right-handed person writes with their left. I showed them the 11-degree descending baseline, produced by a woman who could not rotate her wrist and had to swing her whole shoulder. I showed them the tremor, fine, high frequency, involuntary, not the careful wobble of a copyist, the signature of a damaged nervous system. This, I said, cannot be faked, not in either direction. A healthy hand cannot produce it, and a damaged hand cannot escape it. I looked up. Next slide, please. And the First Amendment to the Whitfield Family Trust came up on the screen, dated the 27th of March, and I heard, distinctly, from the second row, the sound of a woman setting down a glass of wine. This document, I said, was filed with the Marin County Probate Court on the 21st of November of last year. Case number 25, TR 1188. I turned and looked at Judge Diane Reddick. Your Honor, I said, I believe it went across your desk. 300 people turned to look at the judge, and the judge did not move a muscle. It bears the signature of Helen Marie Whitfield, I said. Right-handed, cursive, fluent, forward slanting at 22 degrees. Executed, allegedly, 5 days after that birthday card. I pointed at the screen with my whole hand. On the 27th of March, my wife's right arm had a manual muscle grade of 1 out of 5. That means a flicker of contraction and no movement. She could not lift it. She could not hold a pen. She could not have signed her own name if her life had depended on it. And I want you to understand that for 85 days, it did. Someone at the back of the room said a word out loud. Split screen, please. And the two images went up side by side, on a 12-foot screen, in front of 300 lawyers. The broken, staggering, left-handed I am still in here, and a perfect cursive, Helen Marie Whitfield, 5 days apart. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, I have testified in 140 criminal trials, and I have never in my professional life had an easier opinion to render. I took my glasses off. But I do not want you to take my word for it, I said, because I am 71, and I have been told recently, more than once, that I am confused. I put the glasses back on. So let us do arithmetic instead. Next slide. This is the deed of trust from my 2011 refinance. It is a public record. It is in the Marin County Recorder's Office, volume 4471, page 219. Any person on this earth can buy a copy of it for $2. I let them look at Helen's signature on it. Now watch. And the two signatures, the 2011 deed and the March Trust Amendment, slid together on the screen and overlaid and became one. Every loop, every ascender, every pen lift, gone into each other. The room made a sound, a collective, involuntary, low sound. Every one of you knows what that means, I said quietly. I gripped the lectern. No human being can sign their name the same way twice. Not one of you can. You never have, and you never will. Every signature you produce is a unique event, because your hand is a living thing, and living things do not repeat themselves exactly. I looked out at them. An exact match is not proof of authenticity. I let it hang. An exact match is proof of tracing. And that is when the ballroom broke. Not into shouting, into that low, terrible, rolling murmur that a room full of lawyers makes when 300 people simultaneously understand something. Bethany Kwan of Channel 6 was standing on her chair. She had her phone up. She was recording. "There is more," I said, and the room went silent again immediately. "On the 18th of June, I said, a durable power of attorney was executed, bearing my signature. It appointed my daughter-in-law as my attorney in fact. It was notarized by my daughter-in-law. It was filed as Exhibit C to that same probate case. Next slide. My signature. Fluid, confident, right-handed. On the 11th of June, I said, I fell on my back steps and fractured my right scaphoid. Next slide. An X-ray. Next slide. 40 photographs from my granddaughter's 12th birthday party, taken on the 21st of June, on a phone, by my daughter-in-law, showing an old man in a fiberglass cast, from his knuckles to his elbow. She drove me to the emergency room herself, I said. She filled out my intake forms, and 7 days later, she produced a right-handed signature from a man whose right hand she had personally watched a doctor immobilize. I looked directly at the second row, directly at her. She traced both of us, I said, off the same page, off a $2 public record. She told an accomplice she did it on the light table, in the closing room, at Meridian Title and Trust. Grant Mercer stood up. He got about 4 feet before a very large man in a gray coat by the service entrance put a hand flat on his chest, and Grant Mercer sat back down on a chair that was not his. And she said something else, I said. I nodded at the projector. Audio, please. And the grand ballroom of the Ashland Hotel filled up with the sound of my own dining room. Nobody looks at the dates, Wesley. Nobody has ever looked at the dates. And 306 lawyers listened to a woman in the second row of that very room explain, in her own voice, how she traced a dying woman's signature off a light table. Then Wesley Pike's voice. He was BCI, Priscilla. The man testified in more trials than I have. And then hers, warm and affectionate, and utterly certain. He is a house cat now. He is a sweet, sad, harmless old house cat who cannot find his own glasses. The recording ended. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I reached down and I picked up the brass lion, and I held it up so they could see it, and my hand was completely steady. My wife gave me this in 2007, I said. There is an engraving on the bottom. It says, "For the quietest man in the room." I set it back down on the lectern. I would like to say one more thing to the people at table 9, I said, and then I will sit down, because I have gone over my 11 minutes, and your prosecuting attorney is looking at her watch. And I looked at Priscilla Vance Whitfield. She was completely white. She had one hand on the tablecloth, and it was shaking so hard the water in her glass was moving. On the 25th of September, I said, you stood in my kitchen, and you told a police officer that Teresa Vega stole a pearl necklace from my dying wife. I took my glasses off, slowly, and folded them. Helen sold that necklace at Kessler's Jewelry on 4th Street in October of 2009 for $2,100, I said. I have the receipt. She sold it to pay for the caterer at your engagement party. Priscilla's mouth opened. You did not know that necklace was gone, I said, because you never saw it. You saw a photograph of it, on my mantle, and you built a criminal accusation out of a picture frame. I put my glasses in my breast pocket. You did not do that to get her out of my house, I said. You did that 11 days after she recognized you at Arthur Benning's front door. You destroyed a 34-year-old woman's entire career so that no jury would ever believe her. I straightened up, and I have spent 5 months building you a jury that will. Elena Cruz stood up at the head table. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I am going to have to ask everyone to remain seated." The doors at the back of the grand ballroom opened. Special Agent Dana Okafor came in first, with Petrakis behind her, and behind them, 4 more agents and 6 Cedar Hollow officers, and one of them was a young man named Ryan Dunn, who had stood in my kitchen on the 25th of September and written down a lie in his notebook. He walked past table 9, and he did not look at me, and his ears were bright red. They took Wesley Pike out first, still holding his crystal plaque, because nobody thought to take it from him, and he never thought to put it down. They took Grant Mercer next. They took Priscilla last. And she looked at me across that ballroom, over the shoulder of a federal agent, with 300 lawyers standing at their tables in complete silence. And she said one word, "Dad." I did not answer her. I picked up my brass lion, and I put it in my coat pocket, and I walked off that stage, and out through the kitchen, and into the alley behind the Ashland Hotel, and I stood in the snow, alone, and I put my hands on my knees. And then I said her name out loud. Not Priscilla's, Helen's. Wesley Pike pleaded guilty on the 3rd of April, which was the 1-year anniversary of my wife's death. I do not believe he knew that. I do not think he ever looked at the dates either. He was disbarred by the Supreme Court of Ohio on the 9th of May, permanently, with the notation that his conduct constituted a fundamental betrayal of the profession. On the 14th of August, he was sentenced in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Ohio to 9 years and 2 months in federal prison. He is 57 years old. He asked to speak at his sentencing, and he cried for 6 minutes, and I sat in the second row, and I did not move. And afterward, a young federal marshal told me I had the stillest face he had ever seen on a victim. I told him I was not a victim. I was a witness. Grant Mercer pleaded guilty on the 2nd of June, after his own escrow assistant turned over 4 years of internal emails. Meridian Title and Trust was dissolved by order of the Ohio Department of Insurance on the 20th of June. Its underwriter was ordered to pay claims on every policy it had ever issued in Marin County. Grant Mercer was sentenced to 11 years and 6 months. Dr. Peter L. Halcomb, who had signed an incapacity certification for a man he had never met, and had done it 11 times over 6 years, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and healthcare fraud. He surrendered his medical license on the 11th of July. He was sentenced to 5 years and 4 months, and ordered to pay a fine of $250,000. Priscilla Vance Whitfield went to trial. She had 3 lawyers, and she never took a deal, and I understood exactly why, and it was not courage. It was that she genuinely, sincerely, all the way down to the floor of herself, believed she was smarter than everybody in the room. The trial lasted 4 days. I was on the stand for 11 hours and 40 minutes, across 2 of them, and her lead attorney, a very good man from Columbus named Aldridge, tried to make me confused. He asked me what day it was. He actually did that. He stood in front of a federal jury, and he asked a 71-year-old man what day it was, in a tone of enormous kindness, and I watched 12 people understand instantly and completely what kind of family this had been. "It is Thursday, the 22nd of October," I said. "It is 2:14 in the afternoon. My wife has been dead for 568 days. Mr. Aldridge sat down 4 minutes later. The jury was out for 2 hours and 10 minutes. Guilty on all 41 counts. On the 19th of November, in Columbus, Priscilla Vance Whitfield was sentenced to 14 years and 2 months in federal prison, with no possibility of parole, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Her notary commission was revoked. She is permanently barred from any position of fiduciary trust. Restitution was ordered in the amount of $3,140,000, joint and several among the 4 defendants. She allocuted for 90 seconds. She said she had made mistakes. She did not use the word forgery or the word steal, or the name Arthur Bennings, or the name Helen. She looked at me twice. I looked back both times. And now my son. Marcus Robert Whitfield pleaded guilty on the 4th of March to 1 count of making a false statement in a notarized instrument, a felony of the 5th degree in the state of Ohio. Judge Reddick sentenced him on the 21st of April. 90 days in the Marin County Jail, 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service to be served at the Cedar Hollow Adult Day Center, permanent divestment of any interest, present or future, in the Whitfield Family Trust. I was in the courtroom. I did not testify. Elena Cruz asked whether I wanted to give a victim impact statement, and I said no. He looked for me. He turned around in his chair before they took him back, and he found me in the 3rd row, and he looked at me for about 4 seconds, and I looked back at him, and I did not do anything with my face at all. I have thought about that a great deal since. I have wondered whether that was strength or whether it was cruelty wearing strength's coat. I still do not know. The money came back over about 14 months, in pieces, the way it always does. The Whitfield Family Trust was restored in full by order of the probate court on the 9th of June. Judge Reddick voided the First Amendment, voided the durable power of attorney, and voided the incapacity certification. And she wrote a 9-page opinion that used the phrase brazen and calculated predation 4 separate times. The house at 1428 Ashgrove Lane, appraised at $524,000, came back to me. Helen's retirement account, $612,000, came back to me. $186,000 that had already been moved into a shell account was traced and clawed back by the government. And in October, the civil case settled. Meridian's Errors and Omissions Carrier and the Ohio Title Insurance Guarantee Fund paid $2,400,000 to the 9 families. Ruth Bennings Cole received $310,000. Owen Pratt kept his house and his beagle, and he sent me a Christmas card with a photograph of both of them on the front porch. My share of the civil settlement was $780,000. And Teresa Vega, the Marin County prosecutor, moved to seal and expunge the September 25th police report on the 16th of February, 10 days after the ballroom. Elena Cruz did it personally. She did not send a deputy. Caldwell Home Care settled with Teresa for $275,000 and issued a written retraction, which she framed and which now hangs in the hallway of a 2-bedroom apartment on Fairview Street. Marin Community College reinstated her clinical placement on the 25th of February. She passed her boards on the 8th of December. I paid her tuition for the final 2 semesters, and she fought me about it for 11 days, and then she gave up, because I am extremely stubborn, and because she had a 9-year-old. She is a registered nurse now. She is 36 years old, and her name is Teresa Vega, RN, and I would like the entire internet to know it. Now let me tell you what I did with the money. Helen spent 34 years giving people their voices back, and 4 people took her name, and they bolted it onto a shell company, and they were going to launder my wife's estate through a fake charity called the Helen Whitfield Memorial Charitable Trust, because they understood that nothing on this earth is harder to attack than a dead woman's memory. They put her name on a lie, so I have spent the rest of my life putting it on the truth. On the 6th of February, 1 year, to the day, after the Ashland Hotel, we opened the Helen Whitfield Voice Fund at Cedar Hollow Regional Medical Center. I put in $900,000. It does 3 things. It provides free speech and language therapy, for as long as it takes, to any stroke or aphasia patient in Marin County who cannot pay for it. Not 6 sessions, not a copay plan. Free and unlimited and forever. It buys speech-generating devices, the tablets, the eye-tracking units, the communication boards, for people who have lost the ability to talk and cannot afford $11,000 for a machine that would give it back to them. And on the second floor, in a small office with a window, it funds one full-time legal advocate, one lawyer, on staff, whose entire job is to sit with people who cannot speak for themselves and make absolutely certain that nobody ever again walks into their bedroom with a stack of papers and a light table. So that in this county, from now on, when a person cannot say the word no out loud, there is someone standing in the room who will say it for them. That is what the money is for. Teresa Vega is the Voice Fund's first patient care coordinator. She started on the 9th of February. Her salary is $71,000 a year, and she is worth 4 times that. Her daughter Camila is 11 now, and she calls me Grandpa Sam, and I have never corrected her. Ivy is 13. She comes over every other Sunday, and she eats a grilled cheese sandwich, and she tells me about school. Her mother is in a federal facility in Alderson, West Virginia. Ivy sees her 4 times a year, and I drive her, and I wait in the car, and I do not ask her about it afterward unless she starts. She started once, in the parking lot. She cried for a long time and I let her. And then she wiped her face and she said, "Grandpa, was my card the thing that got her?" And I did not lie to her, because Helen would have taken my head off. "It was part of it," I said. Ivy looked out the windshield for a while. "Good," she said. And then she said something that I will carry with me into whatever comes after this. "Because Grandma was still in there," she said, and nobody was listening to her, and she wrote it down anyway. I framed that card. It hangs in the lobby of the Voice Fund, behind glass, at the exact height where a person in a wheelchair can read it without tilting their head. I measured it myself. Pink card, cartoon fox, 7 words in enormous, broken, staggering block capitals, written by a dying woman with the wrong hand over the course of 45 minutes. "Ivy, I love you. I am still in here. Grandma." And on the shelf underneath it sits a small brass lion. Now, Marcus. He finished his 90 days, he finished his 1,000 hours. And then, when the 1,000 hours were up, he did not leave. He took a job at the Cedar Hollow Adult Day Center for $16 an hour. He had been making $140,000 a year, selling surgical stents. I did not know for 11 months, Teresa told me. I drove out there on a Tuesday, and I parked across the street, and I sat in my car for 40 minutes, and I watched my son through a window. He was feeding a man who could not hold a spoon. He was talking to him the whole time, not over him, to him. And I recognized where he had learned that, and it was not from me. I went in. I sat down across from my son in the cafeteria of the Cedar Hollow Adult Day Center, and he went white, and he put his hands flat on the table, like a man waiting to be sentenced again. And I said one thing. "Your mother spent 34 years teaching people how to say the word they were most afraid of," I said. "You have got one to learn." Marcus Whitfield looked at his hands for a long time. "I am sorry," he said. "That is the one," I said. I stood up and I put my coat on, and I got to the door, and I turned around. "Come Sunday," I said. "Bring Ivy. She likes the grilled cheese. He is coming. He has been coming for 9 months. I have not forgiven him. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a tidy ending. But he sits at my wife's table, and he eats. And he goes back on Monday to feed a man who cannot hold a spoon. And maybe that is not forgiveness. Maybe that is just 2 people being in the same room until the room stops being unbearable. I am 73 years old now. I still go down to the basement some nights. I still turn on the lamp over the bench. There is a stereo microscope down there and an oblique light source, and Ohio State has me in twice a year to lecture, and Special Agent Dana Okafor sends me a case about every 4 months and pretends it is a favor to me. She knows it is not. People ask me what I learned. They expect me to say something about family. or about trust, or about how you cannot really know anyone. That is not what I learned. Here is what I learned. They spent an entire year telling one another that I was a sweet, sad, harmless old man who could not find his own glasses. And they were so busy saying it that not one of them ever noticed I was in the room. They put a camera in my kitchen and forgot I could see. They wrote the password in my own drawer. They said the word tracing out loud, 22 feet from a man who spent 34 years hunting it. And they forged the name of a woman whose hand no longer worked. And then they did the same thing to me, off the same page, and never once thought to check whether either of us could still hold a pen. That is not bad luck. That is what contempt costs. So if there is anyone listening to me tonight who has been made small at their own kitchen table, if you have been talked over, or talked about, or handed a brochure you did not ask for, I want you to hear this from a 73-year-old man who has been exactly where you are. Being underestimated is not a wound. It is a position. It is the best position on the board, and it is the only one they will ever hand you for free. An old lion does not need to roar. He just needs to be the one still holding the pen. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. I read them, all of them. Like this video, so it finds the next person who needs it. And subscribe to Old Lion Stories, where the quietest man in the room always speaks last.